when we're going to talk about the time period from the early 50s to the mid 70s. The reason why I call it Bricks, Butter, and Baldwin Electrics is they ran these Baldwin Electrics. In fact, there's these locomotives were built in the 1920s and they're still operating today. So you got 100-year locomotives still operating. The bricks, one of their main customers was the Mason City Brick and Tile Company, and there's a large state brand creamery there in Mason City they service. Those were their two largest customers. So there's Mason City relative to Des Moines. You can see this as a map of Iowa about 1950. You can see all the rail lines that went across Iowa. Mason City had 5 railroad lines, and the Mason City Clear Lake. So it was a pretty busy railroad town. Here's a map of Mason City. You have 5 trunk lines. So you had the Milwaukee Road that had its line from Marquette over through Spencer, and then you have a line that went, the Milwaukee Road had a line that went up through from Mason City up to Austin, Minnesota. Then you had the Emmett St. L that came down from Minneapolis on its way to Marshalltown through Peoria. Then you had the Chicago Great Western on its line from Minneapolis down to Omaha. The Rock Island came into town on their spine line from Kansas City up to Minneapolis. Chicago Northwestern also had a line through Mason City from down by Belle Plaine up through Fairmont. And then on the south side of town, connecting Mason City and Clear Lake, you had the Mason City Clear Lake electric line. Why Mason City? Because of all the heavy industry. You had 2 large cement plants, a large packing plant, and you had a sugar beet on the north side of town, all which required extensive rail service. And then you had the large brick and tile industry in Mason City, right on the southwest side of town, which was served exclusively by the Mason City and Clear Lake. This is kind of a simplified graphic showing the lines through town. The Mason City Clear Lake handled the interchanges between the Rock Island, Emmett St. L, the Emmett St. L, the Northwestern, and the Great Western, and the Minneapolis St. Louis. The main shops for the Mason City Clear Lake were located at Emory, which is about halfway between Mason City and Clear Lake. We'll just go kind of through a brief history of the line. It was founded in the late 1800s by a guy named William Bryce. He built this line to connect Mason City to the lakeside resort city of Clear Lake, 9 miles to the west. It was a 600-volt line, opened on July 4th. Then in 1913, they sold it to the local utility, People's Gas and Electric. In 1936, they ran streetcars up until 1936. In 1936, they lost the franchise, and the city didn't renew the franchise. And so all these lines that went through all the different neighborhoods in Mason City and down Federal Avenue were torn out, which just then left the freight operation of the railroad from 1936. In 1950, the utility sold the railroad to a company executive named Charles Strickland, and he ran the railroad from 1950 to 1961. But by the late 50s, things were starting to change in the railroad scene. Strickland was trying to find a buyer to purchase the railroad. The Rock Island looked into it, the Emmett St. L looked into it, but eventually a group of investors led by a General Motors executive, Harold Boyer, purchased the railroad. And on July 1st, the name changed to the Iowa Terminal Railroad. So then they got rid of the silver and red and black paint scheme, and they replaced it with a traction orange and silver scheme. So from 1961 to 1987, the railroad was known as the Iowa Terminal. They looked towards an expansion and cost cuttings, and in 1963, they actually abandoned some of the line that went into downtown Clear Lake. They also purchased the Charles City Western in 1964. Now, the 2 railroads never physically connected, but they did run them as separate divisions of the Iowa Terminal Railroad. So you had the Iowa Terminal Mason City Division and the Iowa Terminal Railroad, the Charles City Division. The Charles City Division serviced the large Oliver and White tractor plant in Charles City. And eventually, when the tractor plant was closed over in Charles City, the Charles City Western side division was abandoned. And this left only the original portion of the Mason City Clear Lake, now Iowa Terminal, which is still in operation today as the Iowa Traction Railroad. So let's begin our tour with the east end of the railroad. So there's a circle there where we're going to start out. We'll go from east to west. So this is the very east end of the railroad. They interchanged here with the Milwaukee and the Minneapolis St. Louis. They did have several customers there. They had a Northwestern Bell telephone, which they would get poles and different stuff in for there. And then there was a Higley Cold Storage, which was a cold storage warehouse. And then you had a small trucking company that had a warehouse there too. You can see they're numbered 1, 2, and 3 on the map there. And then, of course, you had the interchange with the Milwaukee Road, the interchange with the Minneapolis St. Louis. Then also on this side of town, on this side of the railroad, you had a small yard, which was called South Mason City. And there was a small yard office there. And that was basically the yard office for for all of Mason City. There was a clerk there, a train master was there. They also had a small loading ramp, and there were several warehouses along there and a icing facility. So this picture is a soft Marty picture. If you follow the red X's, that's approximately where these photos were taken. This is the Milwaukee transfer job, shoving some cars down into the Emmons St. L and the Mason City Clear Lake transfer tracks. Now we're standing on 15th Street looking north. You can see the trolley line under there under the Milwaukee hoppers. This is southbound freight 20, probably coming through Mason City. We're looking north here. And then as he crossed the 15th Street, we're looking south now. And down there, you can see right there's the Mason City Clear Lake coming up to pull the transfers with the Emmons St. L and the Milwaukee. Here he is after the freight went by. Now he's crossing 15th Street to go work the transfer tracks with the Milwaukee. That warehouse on the right-hand side is the Northwestern Bell Telephone Company. We're looking west, standing on 15th Street. This is another shot here. This is the Emmons St. L. We're standing on 15th Street. This is the daylight switcher. He's getting ready to work the transfer tracks with the Milwaukee. You can see the pole line off to the left there. That's the interchange between the Mason City Clear Lake and the Milwaukee. Here he is we're down at this curve here where we curve off of 19th Street and curve up towards the Emmons St. L. But he's shoving cars up into the Emmons St. L transfer. These are empty coal hoppers that were probably empty, loaded, that were originally loaded for coal for one of the power plants in Mason City. Here's another shot taking on that curve down there, down by 19th Street. This time here, he's switching out cars for the Emmons St. L transfer. That's a Wilson reefer. It's most likely going empty back to Albert Lee on the Emmons St. L. Here you can see here another shot of him switching the Emmons St. L transfer tracks. The Emmons St. L transfer tracks would be right here. That's where they transferred with the Emmons St. L. Here's another shot. There's the cold storage facility right off of 15th Street. Here he is shoving up towards the transfer tracks. And here's the Emmons St. L day job. Now he was up working the Milwaukee transfer. Now he's down working the transfer tracks here with the Mason City and Clear Lake. Here's another shot of Time Freight 19 heading north towards Minneapolis on the Emmons St. L. And you can see all the trolley wires over there. It's the little yard with the transfer track with the Mason City and Clear Lake and the Emmons St. L. Down here off of 19th Street, at this time, the warehouse wasn't being used anymore. So they used it, the Mason City Clear Lake used it a lot to put storage cars for the maintenance away department. That's their maintenance away car. So at this time, that warehouse wasn't being used anymore, but that's the little HD Hermie warehouse there, right at that curve off of 19th Street. So now we'll talk about South Mason City, where they had their little yard and their yard office and the icing facilities. It was a small yard, just a runaround track used to run around cars so they could shove up to the two transfer tracks there off to the right. You can see the transfer tracks on the map. Also, reefer cars were iced here. They had an ice house there. They would bring ice from Clear Lake 9 miles to the west, and they would store ice at the ice house over there for icing reefers, mostly for the butter traffic that was coming out of the state brand creamery, which we'll talk about later. There was also a small yard office there and a loading ramp where they used to unload implements and other products from dealers in Mason City. This is the ice house. It was destroyed by a windstorm in 1950, and it was torn down after that. But this is where ice was brought over and stored to ice the reefers. After the storm in 1950, this is how they iced reefers at South Mason City with a truck from a local ice company. This is the small yard there. Like I said, it wasn't much. This was looking west towards Clear Lake. Here's another shot basically of the South Mason City facilities. This here was the yard office with the loading ramp. You can see this old car here was used for storage at that time. It was on the stub track there. Another shot of the yard with the local switch crew. Here's the facilities. This was the yard office and where they had a clerk. So this is basically the office for Mason City there, for the Iowa terminal or the Mason City and Clear Lake. There's a picture of that dilapidated car that they used for storage. We're standing on the storage ramp. There's this local motor there that's used to protect the traffic and the interchanges in Mason City, tied up over there. Here we're looking east back towards the Emmett St. L Milwaukee transfer tracks. We're looking west, and then the curve would curve off to the left towards the Milwaukee and the Emmett St. L. You can see on this picture here all the reefers that were stored there to get iced and then to go over to the state brand creamery to be loaded with butter. Here's just another shot of, I like this paint scheme. I'm partial to it. I wish they would do a heritage unit with the units, the electric units they still have, that they would paint one like this. This is a derailment that happened. This is some movies. Movies of the Mason City Clear Lake are really, really rare. But this derailment happened at this little yard in South Mason City. Now, this is before hard hats and OSHA, strict FRA regulations and stuff. So, I mean, these guys are basically putting boards underneath the wheels to try to get the wheels back on this very, very tiny 60-pound rail. But you watch, he's put some blocking in front of the wheels, and the engineer or the motorman will try and get it up, and he just barely gets out in time. So you got to be pretty nimble. Like I said, you wouldn't get, as a railroader now, you wouldn't get past doing this today. You'd be fired. But you can see he's got a long string of reefers there. So now we'll go from South Mason City to Clear Lake Junction. We'll look at that part of the railroad. So from South Mason City to Clear Lake Junction, you only had one online customer, which was Nichols Wire and Central States Steel. They did steel panels and fencing. It was a warehouse. And then you had two railroad interchanges, one with the Chicago Northwestern and one with the Great Western and Rock Island. The Great Western Rock Island interchange was there at Clear Lake Junction. Clear Lake Junction was a Great Western station there that protected the diamond where they crossed the Mason City and Clear Lake. So we'll start here at Federal Avenue where the X is, or excuse me, at South Mason City where the X is. Here we are at South Mason City, going to do some switching and head west towards Clear Lake. Here's a day on South Federal. Federal Avenue splits Mason City north and south. It's Federal Highway 65. It splits Mason City north and south, east and west, or goes north and south, splits Mason City east and west. It's a busy intersection, but there was a McDonald's on the corner there for years. And here he is getting ready to cross Highway 65 past the McDonald's. Here we are standing in a motor, soft Marty picture here again, and we're standing, and you can see how the motorists are coming right across in front of the motor. No surprise, they still do it today. But you can see the McDonald's there and stuff. That gives you an idea of crossing highway. We're looking west, so up at the top of the hill there where those cars are, that's the little South Mason City yard that we just talked about. Here's another shot outside. This was a fan special here that they were running that day, a rail fan special. And they must have stopped at McDonald's to go and have lunch, but they parked right there at the McDonald's. I always like that when they changed the Iowa terminal from Mason City to Clear Lake. I always like their little slogan. It has the connections, meaning Iowa terminal has the connections. So we'll talk now about the interchange with the Northwestern. This line, like I said, came out of Belle Plaine, went north up through Mason City towards Fairmont. But they had interchange there with the Mason City and Clear Lake. Here we are. You can see some of these stacks in the background there on the right-hand side by that Quonset hut. That's some of the brickyards that we'll be talking about, but there was like 5 or 6 brickyard plants in Mason City, all in that area. But this is another fan special, and he has just crossed the crossing there with the Northwestern. We're standing on 19th Street, Highway 106, kind of looking north and to the west. All that crossing is there to the right. That went back to the old Sears Shopping Center, if anybody's familiar with Mason City. And here he is. He's got the gate swung across the Northwestern, and he looks like he's shoving towards South Mason City. Nichols wired steel is that white building back in the background behind the motor. Here's on a cold day like today, but much, much more snow. He wants to cross there, the Northwestern crossing there. And you can see he's coming out, and somebody there is working the timer there to get the gate. So in that box there was a little timeout mechanism that would time out to make sure that there was no trains coming on the Northwestern. As soon as that timed out and the block cleared for him that he could get across, there was no conflicting movement detected. That gate would unlock and he would swing that across, and then he could go across the Northwestern. Now we're on the other side of that gate towards the west, and this is him actually pulling out off of the transfer with the Northwestern. So the Northwestern transfer was on the south side of 19th Street. Here he is on the transfer track to the Northwestern. They had some trouble with the lines there that day, so they got the line car out to fix the overhead wire. You can see the other motor there. It's got a box car waiting for him to get done so he can shove that over to the Northwestern transfer. Here's a motor down here. Now we're standing on 19th looking south. These are the transfer tracks with the Northwestern. This is the Northwestern. You can see the transfer tracks from the Mason City Clear Lake there off to the right, where there's a reefer standing there in a tank car. But then now you see this is the local that came north on the Belle Plaine, and he's getting ready to cross the highway heading north, and then he'll cross over the Diamond with the Mason City and Clear Lake. So now he's just crossing 19th Street. He's just crossed the Diamond now. You can see the smash board for the Mason City and Clear Lake, and he's heading north up to the yard in Mason City. Now he's cleared the Diamond there. Here's a movie that was taken around 1970 of the Northwestern interchange. We are shoving, this is the Northwestern transfer job. He's shoving out through the transfer tracks heading up towards the North Yard in the Chicago Northwestern. And as soon as he gets across, then the Iowa terminal will come across and he'll pull the cars that they just delivered to the Iowa terminal. There was a train, I was told by a former employee of the Iowa terminal, Mason City Clear Lake. There he is getting the gate. You can see the gate's unlocked. The opposite arm swings up. That gate swings across the Northwestern to guard against any traffic, and then he'll come across. But I was told by an ex-employee that there was a train master that drove around all the time, followed the motor around, and he would check the interchanges. And as soon as cars got interchanged from another railroad, they would quickly send a motor over to pull the transfer and deliver the cars to the appropriate customers. So there he is now. He's crossed 19th Street. He's going to tie on to the cars that were just delivered by the Northwestern, and he'll take them across. Here he is crossing 19th Street. The guy's out there making sure that that trolley line doesn't come off the wire. Now the traffic's going across 19th Street there, but definitely a weed problem, right? Well, on another day, there's a crew and they're going to fix that weed problem. So he's going to swing. He's got the gate. He's swinging it across the Northwestern there. And you can see he's going across the diamond there. There's the weed sprayer. This is before this, so this is before OSHA and all the herbicide restrictions and stuff. But I'm sure those guys were good and exposed with DDT or whatever they were spraying that day. But at least they're nice enough to shut it off when they see the kids at the crossing. But needless to say, the Iowa terminal was a very frugal operation. So now we'll leave the transfer there and we'll go talk about this customer here, Nichols Wire and Central States Steel. Here it is at Nichols, when it was Nichols Wire. He's actually shoving in towards those transfer tracks that we were just talking about earlier with the Northwestern. You can see a couple of reefers there in a Central Georgia boxcar, but that shows that Nichols Wire there. Here's after Central State Steel, but this on a very cold day. I think it was this February of '62. But there they are spotting a boxcar. That track that went into Central State Steel was a depressed track that went underneath there for an unloading ramp so they can unload boxcars there. But this is the only picture I've ever seen of them spotting a car at that Central State Steel. Excuse me. Now we'll go over here towards the railroad interchanges with the Northwestern and the Rock Island, or the Great Western and the Rock Island. First, there was a small lead there where that X is that went back to some brickyards. And here's a picture here, him going past. You can see off to the left, there was a line, a set of poles there, line wire going back. That was an additional lead that went back. So now we're getting in towards where the brickyards were, towards the west side of Mason City. Now we'll talk about Clear Lake Junction. Like I said, Clear Lake Junction was a station on the Chicago Great Western. And it also was the place where the Mason City and Clear Lake would interchange cars with the Rock Island and the Great Western. Here's kind of a diagram of what it looked like. This is the Mason City and Clear Lake. Here's the Great Western that crossed. And then the Rock Island came in and got on trackage rights through Mason City up to Manly on the Great Western. This is the depot at Clear Lake Junction. It was on the southwest side of Mason City. Like I said, it was a station and tower which controlled the crossing between the Mason City, Clear Lake, and the Rock Island and the Great Western. And the Mason City, Clear Lake can be seen in the foreground. This is their track here. The Great Western goes at a diagonal there in front of the depot. This was used up until about 1964. Then the station was closed and the crossing was remotely controlled from the passenger depot a few miles to the north. But at this time, there was still an operator in there that physically controlled levers, which controlled the interlocking between the Great Western and the Mason City Clear Lake. Here we are standing on the Great Western side looking. You can see all these reels and boxes here stacked up outside. That's all the cable and equipment that they're getting ready when they automate this, or they close this station and run it from the passenger depot up at the north side of town. Here's what the inside, these are all the levers that controlled all the switches and signals for that interlocking at Clear Lake Junction. Here's where the operator's desk inside the bay window at Clear Lake Junction. Here we are. This is a Mason City Clear Lake or Iowa terminal. Anytime you see orange, it's the Iowa terminal days. You see silver motors, you're talking pre-1961. But anyway, he's crossing the diamond there. You can see the Clear Lake Junction depot in the background. Here we are standing in a motor. This is after they had closed the station there at Clear Lake Junction, and they put these automatic, well, they're not automatic signals, but they're block signals here to protect the diamond. There's a little box there on the mast. When I was told, there was a little button there, and they would push that, and that would ring a bell a couple miles north into the passenger depot up in Mason City, off of what, 2nd Street, Clark? First Street. And then that would alert the operator up there that the Mason City Clear Lake was standing at the crossing there, wanting you to get across the Great Western. And then they would either, depending on traffic, give them light or let them sit. Now, like I said, this was a joint trackage between the Great Western and the Rock Island. Here's the Rock Island southbound freight going past the Clear Lake Junction, heading south, just getting ready to cross the Mason City Clear Lake. You can see the transfer tracks are off to the left, be the transfer tracks with the Rock Island and the Great Western with the Mason City and Clear Lake. Here we got a motor here now sitting on the transfer tracks, getting ready to go up, pull them box cars up there on the transfer track. There he is pulling. We're standing kind of behind the depot. These are the old semaphore signals there when the station was still, those signals would have been controlled by them levers you saw earlier when we looked at the interior of the depot. But he's pulling the transfer tracks there. Here's another, we're standing on 19th Street, maintenance away car just clearing the diamond there at Clear Lake Junction, looks like he's heading east towards Mason City. Now we're standing on the Great Western looking south towards the highway crossing there on 19th Street. Be in the late to mid 50s, late 50s. Here's another shot. This would be post 61 of them doing the transfer work there at Clear Lake Junction. The Great Western ran a local from Clarion to Hayfield and back. It was very hard to get pictures of that, but here he is. This is the Great Western crossing 19th Street. Clear Lake Junction is that green roofed building in the background. He's heading south towards Clarion, Iowa. Now we're standing on the Great Western looking north towards Mason City. The signal to the right there with the silver mast, that's the signal on the Rock Island. That's the spine line signal for him to get on the Great Western. Like I said, it was joint trackage between the Rock Island and the Great Western through Mason City. And we're standing there looking at the block signal for the red there on the Great Western looking north. And the Mason City Clear Lake looks like he's heading across the diamond there. That's a funny story about this. There's another Rock Island train. He's heading north through the diamond there. But you can see the Mason City Clear Lake or the Iowa terminal sitting there waiting for him to cross. You'd see how there's a slight curve through that diamond there. Well, the story is that that's supposed to be at a 90-degree angle there. And somebody screwed up when they measured and put the wrong geometry in. And when the diamond was put in, it had that goofy angle. So they actually had to curve the track on the Mason City and Clear Lake so they could use that diamond temporarily while somebody got their measurements right and put the right diamond in. So anyway, now we'll talk about Clear Lake Junction to Emory. Emory is where all the shops and stuff, kind of the main headquarters there as far as the shops and the stuff for the Mason City Clear Lake. But we'll talk about this brickyard area. So here's the brickyards in Mason City, very extensive. There was at one time, my dad worked there from like 1961 or 69 to about 74, 73, 74. He worked in the billing department and would bill cars out to the Iowa terminal loaded with drain tile and brick. But there were several plants. At this time, there was probably 5 different plants. You can see they're kind of grouped together, but lots and lots of traffic for the Mason City Clear Lake out of these plants. The brickyards also had their own electric railway to haul clay from the clay pits over to the mixing and extruding plants to make the clay, tile, and the bricks. So here's a picture of one of their side dump cars on their own electric railway that they use. So this dump truck's coming from the pit. He's dumping clay into the little electric side dump car there, and then they'll take that and dump that at the plant. Here's a color photo of the same kind of car on their own little electric line. There he is dumping it. It would go into a conveyor system and then be conveyed to different plants as needed. Here's an overhead shot, an aerial shot showing kind of the area that we're looking at. You can see the Great Western and the Rock Island. That's that hatch line that goes through. Northwestern kind of sweeps off there on the right-hand side. But all the red is all the Mason City and Clear Lake. That's all the tracks that they had into, you know, there were several yard tracks off these other tracks, but these are the main tracks into the brickyards there in Mason City. You had, at this plant, you had plant 2, 3, and 4 that were still active at this time this aerial photo was taken. And then down here off to the left, you see the 3 tracks that curve off towards the bottom of the screen. That was the tracks into that big creamery where they made all the butter and then the dried milk. Pictures of the Mason City Clear Lake with Iowa terminal inside the brick and tile plant are hard to get. They didn't let very many rail fans inside the plant there at brick and tile to take pictures, but we've got some pictures of him going in and out kind of. Here he is crossing he had just crossed the diamonds there at Clear Lake Junction, and now that track off to the left, they're all in poles. That's the first lead that goes into the brick and tile. We're standing on 19th Street, kind of looking northeast. This is on a different day. He's got quite a few cars there, but on the left-hand side of the motor, you can see the smokestacks there and some box cars. Those are the stacks and the kilns for the brick and tile plant back there. Here he is shoving into the brick and tile plant. He's got a bunch of box cars that are going to be loaded, clean and loaded. They would load that brick and that tile in straw. They would use straw to pack that brick and tile so it wouldn't break. But he's shoving a bunch of empties up towards the lead there, up going into the plants. Here he's coming out of the plants. You can see back there on the horizon there, a couple stacks and maybe a couple kilns back there from the plants. Another shot there, that lead that went back. I've only found one shot, really, a color shot, but this is inside the plant. You can see how the platforms were built up on each side so the guys could load these box cars. They could wheel carts in of the tile. You can see all the tile and the brick on the left-hand side there. So everything was nice and level. They could wheel those loads in and out into the box cars when they loaded the box cars at the tile. There was also another Milwaukee interchange up on the north side of the brick and tile plant where they could interchange with the Milwaukee. Here we are. This is the Milwaukee switch engine, and we're sitting. This picture is taken sitting inside an Iowa terminal motor, and probably had just handed off or going to pick up cars from the Milwaukee. This is on the very north side. The bricks yards and stuff would be behind us. Now we'll talk about the second largest industry next to the brick and tile plants, which was the State Brand Creamery. There's a overhead shot, an aerial shot of the State Brand Creamery. This area here is where the main plant is where they made the butter, and then in '59 they made an evaporation plant here where they made dried milk, so they have powdered milk come out of there. And the Mason City Clear Lake built another track. There's originally only 2 tracks in there, but they built another track when they built the evaporation plant. Here they are loading tubs of butter at the plant there in Mason City into reefer cars. Here we got, he's going into the butter track. You can see that neat billboard there with the box of butter kind of falling out of the billboard. but that's the state brand creamery. But he's shoving into, is just shoved into there to go pull reefers loaded with butter. Here's another shot of him going across 19th Street, pulling reefers out of the same track. That was a depressed track also, where they could load directly. It was at the level of the reefer doors there, so they could load in and out. Here he is now, switching the same track. We're standing on 19th Street here. When they built the evaporation plant, the Mason City and Clear Lake, had to build another track across the highway there. And this is a picture of them doing that construction. They've got the highway tore up there. They got their line car out there, and they're getting ready to build that track into that evaporation plant so they can load box cars of powdered milk. This is after the track has been put in. That crossbuck there is the new track. We're looking west towards Clear Lake, but at this time, this would be the very western edge, southwestern edge of Mason City. This is about 1959, 1960. There's a good shot of the crew come out to get their picture taken. Now, West Mason City was a station that was there during the time that they would run trolley cars. West Mason City served an area, an outlying neighborhood called Central Heights. And basically, all it was a sign at this time, West Mason City. And there's a group of about, 40, 45 houses out there. But that was a neighborhood on the very west outskirts of Mason City, kind of isolated, called Central Heights. But the railroad called it West Mason City. Now we'll talk about Emory. Like I said, Emory was halfway between Mason City and Clear Lake. This is where all the shops were. There was a couple industries out here. This is where the generation plant or the transformers were that operated the electric overhead wire. But anyway, there was a car barn out there for repairs and where they stored the streetcars when they ran streetcar service. This is about 1948. The big black pile there is a pile of coal. And what they would do is they would stockpile coal there for the winter. And that coal was taken up to a generating plant that was basically on the south side of downtown Mason City and only had room for 2 or 3 cars to load at a time. So they didn't have any room for a real stockpile uptown. So they would stockpile this coal out at Emory. And then as they needed it to replenish their small stockpile uptown, they would load it with a clamshell back into cars and take it back uptown. So here's kind of a map of what was out there at Emory. You see the coal piles, Cashway lumber, and that previous photo wasn't built yet, but there was a lumber yard out there. Then you had the old shop with the rotary and the transformers and stuff for the powering the overhead wire. And then you had the car shop. Thermal Gas had a small LP plant out there. And then there was a hemp plant. At this time, it was Lifetime Motors. They were building motorhomes and campers there. That was originally a wartime hemp plant when it was originally built. That was on the south side of the highway there. So the first picture is right here. We're standing here, we're looking west towards Mason City. You can see there's a carload of poles there. That'd be for the utility, probably Northwestern Bell, or it could be for the People's Gas and Electric, but you can see the crane there. That's there to unload and load cars for that stockpile of coal there. Now we're looking looking west towards Clear Lake. That car off there to the right is an old trolley car that they boarded up and used it for sand storage for the locomotives. The main line is the center track there, and there's the sidings off to the left and right. Here we're kind of standing in the same area looking north and west towards the original motor barn there. And the back part, you can see where all the electric poles are. That's where the converter was and all the electrical equipment to run the overhead wire. Next picture was taken outside here, the old shop. He's gotten a car, it looks like from Thermal Gas, that's a pressurized LP car. So Thermal Gas, you can just see below that tree line there, there's a bunch of LP tanks and stuff. he would be coming, looks like he's coming from switching the thermal gas dealer there. But they had a couple of these very rare three-way switches there at the plant or at the yard there at Emory that went over to the car bar or to the motor barn there, the shops. There was a three-way switch there. Then there was another one in another area. Here's what the Emory shops looked like from the back side, and then there's what it looked like from the back side or the road side. There's a motor, freshly painted motor, it looks like, for the new owners, Iowa Terminal, sitting outside. You can see they were good Mason City customers, that they built their car or their shops out of the tile from the Mason City brick and tile. And somebody went so far as to put a flower box in the window and plant flowers. So they were proud of their little shop. Here's the car shop. We'll stand outside there. This is where they would store like the cars when they used to run passengers. So the trolley cars and stuff would be stored in this building. This building was torn down in about 1964. But it also too was built out of Mason City brick. Here we are. This is just showing some motors and storage that they had bought and were in the process of repainting. But anyway, this shows that fertilizer plant that was built out there who would get fertilizer cars in. So they did have some industry out there at Emory. Here we are. We'll stand down here. This diamond that you're looking at, when Cashway Lumber built, there's a Y track there. So you got a track that goes off. That's where that motor's heading off to, and the track that we're standing on. And then they had to build two diamonds to go across to get to where they built the new lumber yards. There was two diamonds they had to cross in that little yard so they could service that lumber yard there, Cashway Lumber, when they built that about 49 or 50. Here we're standing on the siding here. Here's that dilapidated car that they used for sand storage for the locomotives. And here's what it looks after they got rid of it. And it's left the frame there, and that was it. But you can see the Cashway Lumber now built there in the foreground, and then you can see the shops in the background there. This shows the track that went across the highway there that went over to that motorhome plant. But again, this track that you see here was a siding. A lot of times was used just for storage for motors that they would use, cannibalize for parts, maintenance away equipment, stuff like that. We're standing at the highway there, looking at some motors they got in storage. And then we're looking at standing at the west end of Emory at the little yard. There's the Cashway Lumber store. That will come into play here in our story here and play a really big part in the history of the railroad here. On the day before Thanksgiving, 1967, a fire started in the Cashway Lumber in one of their sheds. And there was a brisk south wind. And the fire was so large there that it engulfed the entire Cashway Lumber, but it also set the shop on fire, the motor shop there for the Mason City Clear Lake. And in the process, several motors and a trolley car were destroyed along with the substation. So they were kind of at loss because they couldn't power the overhead wire. And there were several discussions whether they were going to even resurrect the power if they were, or the electric lines, or they were going to dieselize and tear down the overhead wire. For a while, they leased a Rock Island Whitcomb diesel while the new substation was being built. But eventually, the decision was made to rebuild the shop and re-energize the overhead wire and keep it as an electric railroad. But here's basically, you can see how close the lumber sheds were from the lumber yard, and you can see how their proximity to the shop that was burned down. And here's what the aftermath was of the fire. This is the picture of the Whitcomb diesel that they released from the Rock Island. He's over there at the State Brand Creamery. But this is the diesel that they leased. They leased it for about 3 weeks. In about 3 weeks, they had the overhead wire energized again so they could use their electric motors. But that's just kind of a rare shot. So now we'll head to the very west end of the railroad at Clear Lake. Here's kind of an overhead view of all the tracks and the industries at Clear Lake. You have several industries. Great Lakes Pipeline, which was Williams, now it's Magellan or something, but it runs along basically Interstate 35 now. You can still see it from the interstate. And then you have Kennedy and Sons, which was a produce dealer. They grew potatoes, onions, and sugar beets. Zeidler Concrete, they made concrete blocks. Thermogas was an LP dealer. And then you had a stockyard down there that got stock in and out. And then you had downtown close to the lake and towards the downtown area, you had Farmers Elevator Company and Clear Lake Lumber. But you can see where the hashed line is to get downtown Clear Lake. They had some street running to get downtown. So we'll start kind of on the east side of Clear Lake. Where the X is where the next picture was taken. This is called Baker's Corner. This is where it kind of curved to the north and then curved to the west, and then headed into Clear Lake. You can see he's coming back from Clear Lake, heading towards Mason City with stock cars from the stockyards over at Clear Lake. Next shot here will be taken by the Great Lakes Pipeline area. Here he is. This is about 1957. He's switching cars there off of the siding, and you can see the big tanks off to the left. That's the pipeline company there. They would load gasoline into the tanks, and the tanks were distributed to the other railroads to go to petroleum dealers across the Midwest. Here he is shoving into across the crossing there. That's Main Street, Clear Lake, when it was gravel on the east side of town. But he's shoving into the pipeline. Now you can see we're loading gasoline back there in those loading platforms. So he has to reach in with buffer cars because the overhead wire doesn't go all the way back to the gasoline loadout because you don't want sparks from the overhead wire while they're loading gasoline cars. So they usually had to have several buffers to go back in there and reach to switch those cars out. Here he is crossing. That brick building in the background is Kennedy and Sons. That's the produce dealer that we'll talk about next. That was another customer. So now we're done switching kind of the pipeline. You can see it in the background. And now he's making some moves here on the siding to get his cars ready to go down to a little industrial park area where Zeidler Concrete was, the stockyards, and then the LP dealer. So now you can see that the east end of Main Street's kind of a paved street there, but he's getting ready to go down further into Clear Lake. But we'll stop here and look at Kennedy and Sons here just for a moment. This was a neat picture I come across. I heard rumors that they did this from a lady in Clear Lake who's a librarian and kind of historian. But that's Kennedy and Sons, that brick building in the background. And you can see there's two motors because you're going to have a lot of cars there. But what's happening is this is fall, and Kennedy and Sons dealt in and grew sugar beets. And so what they're doing is they're actually parking these cars along on the tracks there, and you can see Main Street runs along parallel to the tracks. Well, what they would do in the fall is the farmers from Kennedy's and other farmers would come in and they would load their beets into these hopper cars right off Main Street, right off of the street. They put a conveyor down there, they would load them in the hopper cars, and then the Mason City and Clear Lake would take them over to Mason City to give them to the Great Western to take them up to the sugar beet in the fall when the sugar beet was processing beets. But this is, like I said, Kennedy and Sons there. There's an advertisement from them. This is at this Kennedy and Sons warehouse. This was a street sweeper because now we're on, this track is going to scoot over and go down the center of Main Street all the way down to downtown Clear Lake. Well, they had to keep the tracks clean, so they would have the sweeper. A lot of times when Kennedy was loading, they would keep the sweeper there at the track there at Kennedy. This picture was taken here. Now we're getting ready to shove down Main Street. You can see the street running there, and we're going to head down towards Clear Lake. So there's a little industrial park to the south there where Zeidler was, the stockyard, and then the thermal gas. Here he is on a fall day, getting ready to head down towards the thermal gas dealer. See a kid on his bike watching the action going on there. He's got some cars pushed past the switch. I was talking to a guy that worked for the Mason City Clear Lake, and he said a lot of times at the switch, they would switch cars here as they got them out of the industrial park there to line them up to go downtown. And he said a lot of times it was downhill through here, so they would kick cars. And he said we would scare motorists because here all of a sudden they'd be coming down Main Street heading east, and all of a sudden they'd see this boxcar rolling down the tracks towards them with no engine next to it, and they were kicking cars down the street. So a lot of times they'd have to have flaggers out there to kind of warn pedestrians they were in the middle of the street doing their work. Here he is now making the curve, heading shoving south into the industrial park. You can see he's left cars there on Main Street. Clear Lake didn't much appreciate having that track going down Main Street. The railroad didn't take care of it as very well. If you look closely, you can see a lot of potholes and very rough street running there. They didn't maintain it very well. Here we are now down. We'll go down into the industrial park area. This is a side track in there. This guy's out fixing them potholes. That's one of them line cars. And on that little cart that he's pulling behind the line car is an asphalt cooker. So he shoved out of the way to let this guy come down with these tank cars to go to switch the LP dealer and switch the concrete block plant. And then when he gets done switching the customers, this guy will come out and start filling in them potholes. This is a picture taken. Pictures of this area are very, very rare. These are some I got from Dana Grief. They're Ron Sims photos. But this is at Zeidler Concrete. You can see there's a shed there, and then there's an elevator just at the top roof line there. But he has already switched the LP plant. This is a building at the block plant. So he's probably going back there and picking up some hopper cars of aggregate or maybe a empty cement car. So now we'll come back out towards the main line onto Main Street again. That switch was a single point switch. So there was a little plate, and what this guy's doing is he's lifting up that plate with that bar in his hand. So there's a lever in there so they can move the point over to throw the switch so they can get back onto the main. This day they were having a little trouble with it. But they eventually got it there, and he'll head back and he'll tie off back onto his cars, and he'll start shoving down towards the lake now. You can see we're in a residential area of Clear Lake, and we're shoving west towards downtown. So downtown Clear Lake, now there used to be more tracks by that number 2 there. That track used to go right down Main Street. It went towards the lake there along the seawall, and actually went to some hotels. So back in the, prior to the 30s and stuff, they would run people over there to the lake in the summertime and to the resorts. But at this time, it was just stubbed in order to get to that Clear Lake Lumber. But you had a couple customers down here. You had Clear Lake Lumber, the bakery, and you have Depot down there, and then Farmers Co-op. So here he is. Now you can see some of the buildings downtown there coming into view, but you can see the brakemen are walking to kind of direct traffic around them while they get downtown there towards the elevator to spot these cars. So now he's making the turn. There's a tile roofed building down there. That's the actual station, Mason City Clear Lake Station, Clear Lake, but we'll see that here in a minute. So there was a little yard down there, about 4 or 5 tracks, and then there was a spur that went over to Clear Lake Lumber. Here's the facilities. Here's the little yard downtown Clear Lake. That water tower is basically right on the edge of the lake. So you can see how close we are to the lake. The tile roofed building off to the right is the passenger depot, or the depot for the Mason City Clear Lake, which had a grain elevator. If anybody's familiar with Clear Lake, this is basically where the old fairway was downtown. In fact, when they abandoned this property in 1963. Fairway bought this property. They tore down the elevator. The elevator moved to the north side of town, built a new elevator, and Fairway built a grocery store here. Here he is shoving in, making a few moves. There's Clear Lake Lumber in the background. You can still see you can barely see the tracks go back in there, but they still go down Main Street a little ways in order to get over to that lumber yard. So the next picture is taken here of him switching a car, shoving a car into Clear Lake Lumber. He's shoving that in. He's got that spotted. Now he's coming back out. This is the depot at Clear Lake. You can see that the bay window, which is normally on the track side, you can see that Great Northern boxcar back here, but you can see that the bay window is facing the street. Well, that's because originally the main line went right down where that car is in the center of the street and turned and went north or went west towards the lake. So that was actually the main line that went toward what was in the middle of the street. So that's where the agent and the bay window would have been. Here's the back side. There's the bay window on the corner. See the elevator in the background. There was a bakery downtown, and they would service a lot of the grocery stores around the area. In fact, when I was a kid, it was still in operation, and they had the best hamburger buns and stuff. They were yellow. But anyway, they closed several years, or probably several decades ago. But anyway, they would get carloads of flour in. And here they are tearing up some tracks. They were starting at this process to start abandoning the line into Clear Lake. But here was a picture taken by them, Clear Lake paper, and of them tearing up the tracks. But what I got circled is there's one of the cars that came in with 100-pound sacks of flour that they would load from a boxcar into a truck, and they would truck it because the bakery was couple blocks away from here. So I was happy to find this picture showing them unloading bags of flour for the bakery. Here's another shot taken right before they abandoned the line down into Clear Lake. This is about 1962, maybe even summer of 63. You can see the depot off to the right, the elevator, excuse me, in the background. The Skelly Station off of Main Street there. So a guy that I worked with, or not that I worked with, a guy that I know that worked for the Mason City at Clear Lake, when they would go over to Clear Lake, a lot of times he says, that would be take most of the day, go over there and do that work and go back to Mason City. But they would often eat at a bar over there. And over here with this Coca-Cola sign is the Town Pump Bar. You can see that the trolley lines are down. 9 chances out of 10, the crew is over at the bar having a beer, and it's lunch when this photo was taken. Here they are heading back now from Clear Lake, and you can see there's a retaining wall here by this house. There was a hill that coming out of Clear Lake going east, and they actually had to grade that hill down a little bit because the trolley couldn't get up that hill very well. So they had to put this retaining wall in because they had to reduce the grade there. This is a typical train. This is a train coming back from Clear Lake. We're back in Mason City. So if you look at what we got from Clear Lake, you got a couple cars of gasoline from the pipeline, you got an empty cement car and an empty aggregate car from that block company, Zeidler Concrete, and a couple pressurized tanks out of the LP dealer there at the industrial park at Clear Lake. So they would come back from Clear Lake and they would deliver those cars to the respective railroad interchanges to whomever they were billed. But now we've traveled the entire 9 miles between Mason City and Clear Lake. We've looked at the entire railroad. These are the photo credits. The Peterson Cramble archives. They had some pictures I'd never seen before. Big thanks to them for letting me use those. Dana Grief let me use the Ron Sims photos, but all these people, there's photos we saw in the presentation today. And that's it. Sure. If there are any, well, you go ahead, Mike.
Just mention real quick before I forget. We got a participation evaluation form at the front desk. Feel free to fill it out if you would. Appreciate that.
Great. You can look online on the chat if there are any questions come up, Mike. Right there.
Okay.
There's the chat feed. Go ahead.
Question at the motor plant,
Motor plant.
that burned down. What did I saw a generator burned up there. They used coal or fuel oil?
No, it was power that came from uptown from the generating plant to Mason City. They had a substation there.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay. No, they didn't generate their own, they bought.
No, they bought them. Yep. They were owned, the railroad was actually one time owned by the utility. Any other questions or anything? Anything in the chat? All right.
I noticed you stopped in the history right at the end, Gary, before the owners bought it, right before Progressive Rail.
Well, I stopped it before Dave Johnson bought it. Became right.
Yeah.
Became our traction. Yep.
Yeah. Dave Johnson and Lynn Hawbaker.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then they were the ones who then sold it to.
Yes, they were the
Progressive Rail.
Progressive Rail.
Yeah.
I went up to about the 70s and stopped there.
When did that transition between Dave and Lynn?
Progressive Rail, I want to say that was in probably 2009, something in there.
Right, but when did Dave and Lynn buy it?
David Johnson.
Yeah.
Oh, 1987.
Okay.
Yep,
Dave and
1987.
Lynn bought it back. Who's it presently? Progressive Rail.
Progressive Rail.
They still go to Clear Lake?
No,
Just to.
it's basically in, they west of Emory towards Clear Lake, the track is in, just basically the Interstate 35 and to the pipeline company. They don't go over there anymore. They don't service the pipeline. They basically use all that track for storage cars. So
Jake,
Emory's about
can you hear me?
line that we use now. Go ahead.
All those businesses, big plant, auto plant, all those things are missing here, a lot of jobs. Forget that now, guy.
Butter plants closed, the brick plants are all gone. Yeah. So most of all the main industry is gone now. The railroad still exists, like I said, it's Iowa traction. They've been able to get into the soybean plant there. There's ethanol or biodiesel plants that are built on that line. They use the old butter plant transit, build lumber and paper and stuff out of. So they've more businesses that come up. Nothing as large as like a brick plant.
What became the ridiculous?
So when you went to, yes, pretty much they're all gone. Yeah, well, what we did is one of the play pits, which is west of Rick, is a city park and all swimming and stuff. A couple of them have housing developed. It's all been redeveloped.
So there must have been a huge deposit, if you will.
High grade.
And so the market for their slate is one way that is what have you.
The market went away when they started using plastic tops.
And then with butter plant, this would be demanded for them.
That closed in the late 90s, early 2000s. They just they're highly cold. And we kind of shuttered as an association.
What's there? That must have been almost some job. It just was very. Oh, the pack plant too, you mean?
That closed in the 70s.
Where was that again?
On the northeast side of Mason City.
Oh, that probably all went towards,
That's gone too. And one of the cement plants is gone now too.
great people there.
Thank you.